it's one of the most incredible experiences to witness another person's transformation.
Welcome to Leading Notes, where I talk with musicians who are leading the revitalisation of social health in our communities. I'm your host, Melissa Forbes. Melissa Gill is the former program leader of the Absolutely Everybody Choir, a flagship program of Upbeat Arts, formerly School of Hard Knocks, in Queensland, Australia. With over 10 years of experience leading singing for wellbeing programs, Melissa brings a unique combination of musical expertise and human services experience to her work. A jazz vocal graduate from the Queensland University of Technology, she also holds a Masters of Music with distinction, specialising in vocal pedagogy from the Queensland Conservatorium, Griffith University. Melissa's path to community music leadership included a decade-long career in human resources with the Queensland Government, where she specialised in case managing people with mental health conditions. This diverse background has shaped her innovative approach to choir leadership, where she focuses on building trust, fostering musical growth, and creating safe spaces for people experiencing mental health challenges. Her work spans a variety of health and wellbeing choir initiatives. In 2023, Melissa partnered with Wellways and the Carer Gateway to deliver a wellbeing-focused choir for carers. She's also the founder and artistic director of Sing Sing Sing, Queensland's first choir for people living with dementia and their carers. In addition to her work with Upbeat Arts, which is supported by Queensland Health, Melissa's approach emphasises both musical development and personal wellbeing, challenging traditional notions of what community choirs can achieve. Melissa Gill, welcome to Leading Notes.
Hi, Melissa. It's lovely to meet with you.
Melissa, you've described leading the Absolutely Everybody Choir as the best and most important work of your entire life. Can you tell us a little bit about that choir and what made that work so meaningful for you?
You know, I hear that statement, I think, gosh, when did I say that? And then I think the second thing I think is I'm a soprano, which means I'm dramatic, because that I really poured all of my emotional energy into that statement. Having said that, though, it's completely true. So the Absolutely Everybody Choir is now 3 choirs, and it started 10 years ago. And it really was probably the first choir offering in the space of arts health work in Queensland. And it was certainly new to me, and I was really excited by it because I could bring, my HR, human services work, case managing into this musical space. And that really made me comfortable creating a musical entity and a musical program that I really just didn't know how to do. The choir started with a lot of the services that support people with mental health, living with mental health. They referred a lot of their clients. And then over time, what's happened is that we still get referrals, but that's given away largely to family and friends who refer their themselves or refer their loved ones to the choirs as well. So members of the choirs come from a variety of different places. So it is effectively a community choir. When I started working with them, I was really kind of too dumb. I tell this to people all the time. I was too dumb to realise that I should make choir singing easier and accessible. I was too dumb to know I should dumb it down. And so I just went in there and created a community choir. And what I discovered over time was giving people the opportunity to sort of stretch beyond where sometimes other people's expectations of them had left them, to sort of poke their heads up and look around and go, well, maybe I could do this. It's the beginning of transformation for people. And so Absolutely Everybody choirs are all about opportunities to learn, about being stretched, and about through creativity and singing, importantly, having the opportunity to redefine who you are and step back into your life. It is reaffirming. It's life affirming. It's one of the most incredible experiences to witness another person's transformation, particularly when you see people coming from, being unable to be in a room with other people, being so anxious that they can only be in the room for 5 or 10 minutes and then they have to take respite or leave the building completely. And you watch those people sort of adjust and over a period of time return to university study, take on full-time work, and just effectively get their lives back. It's just incredible every day to witness the difference that singing in a group can make in a life. And honestly, if I didn't see it every day, I wouldn't believe it. So it's magical and miraculous. And I think also too, for me as a practitioner, it's equalising is the word I often use. Is probably levelling is better, but every day I used to walk to the doors of the choir room with the weight of the world, of my world on my shoulders, and then I would see the people that I would be working with, and it would remind me that whilst my life could still be complicated, I had so much less going on, and it just gave me the ability to just kind of put it aside and focus on somebody else instead of myself for a little while. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's an incredible experience to be part of that work.
Yeah. I've just been reading some research papers around group singing, and these particular studies are comparing group singing to what it's like to be in a sports team or be part of a creative writing group or whatever, trying to kind of home in, I guess, on what is it about group singing that's special, if anything. And, the jury is still out, I guess, in terms of the way that those studies have produced their findings. You talked about magic and miraculous stuff happening in front of your eyes. And you also kind of touched on one of the things that you see your participants experiencing, which is this sense of achievement, being asked to do things that they would never in their wildest dreams have thought they could achieve. What are the other things at play, do you think, in terms of what participants are getting out of it that you've seen firsthand, in addition to achievement? Are these people who are perhaps socially isolated and can build new social connections? What else are you seeing happening in the room?
Yeah, that's absolutely something that's happening in the room, is that a lot of the people, when I think back to day one and I think about what I saw with certain people over a period of time, they are socially isolated and unused to forming relationships and maintaining relationships, or they have had negative experiences in that space and aren't particularly willing to trust themselves or another person. And so they're placed in a situation where they kind of have to do those things anyway, but they're with a whole bunch of people who know exactly how they feel. And so they tentatively reach towards one another and create friendships. I think, the thing that comes to mind the most is 10 years ago when we started the first Absolutely Everybody Choir, there was still occasionally this idea that people who lived with mental ill health just needed to snap out of it and pull themselves together. And thankfully, I think, whilst that probably exists in pockets still, it's much less prevalent now. I think also along with that was this sort of idea that if you were unable to work because of your mental health or you experienced significant mental ill health, that the world and your family just stopped expecting anything from you. And I think what I saw on people was that they had stopped expecting anything from themselves either. They just kind of, in lots of instances, accepted that this was their life now. And so coming to choir creates an opportunity for them to create new relationships, to be the leader that's in them that's been beaten down by their circumstances to reimagine themselves and reinvent themselves in a safe space, guardianed by safe people, where they are free to experiment and free to express themselves in any way that feels okay to them. And often their lives aren't those places. You know, they can't do those things in their normal life. And so they get to sort of come out of their normal life and be whoever they choose or whoever they want to be and try it on and, you know, get their legs under them, get some confidence, and then go back into their lives being those people as well.
See, I think you're hitting on something there in terms of the difference between a singing group, for example, and a sports team. And it's that idea of a safe space for self-expression. And it's really the music that enables that, you know, in addition to the things that you do as the leader. And so music is this kind of vehicle where anyone can find a place for themselves within it. And then they can express that with their whole being. You know, of course, we've got the embodied voice. It's part of us. And when you use that in music to express yourself, you know, it releases something, I think, in people that you're not necessarily going to experience if you kick a soccer goal.
That's exactly right. I totally agree with you. I was going to say that, you know, I'm all for sports. I'm not a sporting mad person myself, but I'm all for it. And I think I'm really passionate about teams. And I often say that choir is the ultimate team sport. But when you sing, you're using your voice. There's something different when you use your voice. And a lot of people, particularly the cohort that are in the Absolutely Everybody choirs, is that cohort have been silenced. They've stopped using their voice and they desperately want to. And so there's a safe way, which doesn't necessarily always feel safe to start with because a lot of them don't believe that they can sing. But, you know, they start to sing, they start to use their voice, they start to express themselves creatively and musically. And then that just flows into every other corner of their life and they start to show up for themselves in their lives and start to speak up for themselves in their lives as well. So, yeah, I think sports are incredible and amazing and teams are fantastic, and I think music and singing just takes all of that a step further.
I mean, what you're describing there is like a literal and a metaphorical giving voice to someone who's been silenced or hasn't felt safe to express who they really are. And I certainly don't want to come across as being anti-sport either. I'm not that. I don't want to be seen to be advocating that group singing or music making is for everybody either, you know.
No, that's
but for some people, it strikes a chord, right? And
absolutely.
It's that thing that perhaps unlocks something in them. And that's where we kind of start reaching for words like magical or miraculous to kind of describe that, you know.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing how often those words come up when we're talking about these things. On a practical level, Melissa, how do you create that environment of safety and trust so that people feel that they can bring that authentic self into the room?
I'm going to answer that question by telling a story, and that is that when I started this phase of my career 12 years ago, the very first work that I did was building a choir program in a public school, and I hadn't worked with children in that situation before, and I've trained myself to just say yes to experiences and work out how to do it as I go, and I had enough skill. And I learned really, really quickly that kids are a fantastic mirror, which is a nice way of saying if you screw up, they will tell you. And they don't spare your feelings. And so I learned really quickly that I needed to be okay with making a mistake and I needed to grow a thicker skin. But what that did was it followed me around, and I make mistakes all the time. And that's what I did working with Upbeat Arts. You know, as much as I try to be perfect and not get anything wrong, I make mistakes. And so what that did was it normalized getting it wrong. And what I learned was that a lot of people that live with mental ill health have a lurking perfectionist. for whatever reason, whether it came before or it came as a result of, they're trying to get everything right, be perfect for everyone around them, not make any mistakes, they're trying to avoid being, standing out, being ostracized and laughed at. And what we needed to do, and what I was able to do with them, was by just being myself, and that's probably the answer to the question, is normalize getting it wrong and letting them know nobody's going to die if you sing the wrong note at the wrong time in the wrong place. Who cares? There are things that are worth. We used to deal with a lot of fear, a lot of people who are afraid they can't sing, afraid of what's going to happen if it gets wrong. And I used to say to people, there are things in life that are worth being afraid of. This is not one of them. We've got you. Nobody's going to die if you sing the wrong note. You've watched me do it a million times. Let's make mistakes together. And so I think building trust starts with just being authentically who you are, warts and all. That gives them permission to be authentically who they are. And, it was really important for me to make sure that I embraced uniqueness and difference in exactly the way that I wanted to be embraced myself. I think meeting people where they are, making sure that you create a relationship with each one of them, and just being honest and real. I've shared, things about my life and my experience outside of choir, inside choir, which just help them to realise that I'm a real human being. And I think along the way that because I'm real, they can trust me. And I think also too, listening to their fears and letting them have time and space and not treating them like they're not important or that they're silly for thinking and feeling the way that they do, by just creating space and listening and allowing, that engenders trust, I think. And what I've discovered is when they trust you, they will do anything you ask them to do. And that's ideally what every choir leader wants, is a group of people who will do whatever she asks, no matter how crazy.
Yep.
So
with power comes great responsibility, Melissa.
Absolutely. That is true. That is true.
I'm sure that you found yourself in some challenging situations working with that group and with others that you've worked with. How do you go about setting boundaries and kind of keeping yourself safe?
This is where I'm really, really grateful for the decade of HR experience that I had before, and that specific experience of working with, 95% of my caseload was people that had some kind of mental illness or some kind of psychological injury that impacted on their work. So I had to learn. I'm a compassionate person by nature, and I'm an empath, and I'm a bit of a sponge. And I had to learn how to have a professional distance, so I could be caring and empathetic without taking it on board. And I also had to learn where the line was. I had to make sure I created a boundary. And I'm so grateful that I had that decade before I went into this choir. Had I not, I probably would have been a mess pretty early, because, devastating experiences. When people feel comfortable in that choir room, they start to share. They share with you individually, they share with the entire group. And honestly, some of the horror stories I heard about people's lives and circumstances and the way that they were abused as children and things like that, you have to make sure that you have a professional boundary. That being said, anything that's new can take you by surprise. And so in the early days, we had a couple of experiences that kind of reaffirmed for me, okay, I'm too far in. I need to find a safe space to pull back from. So having a professional distance is important, and caring for yourself is important, and learning to leave choir at choir. And when people have disclosed about devastating circumstances, having somewhere you can go to process, someone to talk about the circumstances with, obviously protecting the names to, changing the names to protect the innocent. I was really fortunate that I got to work with a friend, and we were very close, and we often were aware of the same circumstances. And so we would regularly have time where we would just almost sit and look at one another and go, I have no idea what to do with that. And, feel devastated and have a cry, and then pull ourselves together and remind one another that whilst we had compassion and empathy, it wasn't our life, and we needed to put that in a box and move forward.
So having that support network, someone to share with, is important.
I think it is. It's really important. I think we're going to see more and more of this work happen, and it needs to happen. We know that this kind of work is a much cheaper and much more pleasurable way of supporting people in all kinds of difficulty. And so, there needs to be more work, but as there needs to be more support for the practitioners that deliver it, because it's emotionally charged and it requires a lot of you. And, you can be, even the most professional operator can be caught off guard and end up struggling and suffering and burnt out. So having a network of support is really important.
Yeah. And of course, not everybody has 10 years of human resources experience like you happen to have, when they go into this kind of work. So I think also making sure that people are aware of what they're getting themselves into is really important, because I think it's easy to be naive and to think that it's all, roses and ponies and whatever.
Absolutely.
And it can be extremely challenging.
Yeah, it absolutely can. And invariably in every choir that I've worked in, so there's been more than one type of health and wellbeing focused choir. In every one that I've worked in, there have been a handful of people that have been in difficulty that have turned to me or turned to our organisation for help. And you can get pulled into that very quickly and very easily. And if you've not got experience, you feel responsible and you try to solve everybody's problems, and you end up inserting yourself in people's lives where you have no right to be, and they really have no right to expect you to be. So if you don't have experience, background, a network, someone to talk to, you can end up in tricky situations.
And I imagine also having that knowledge of referral pathways, the appropriate pathways to refer people onto if they're needing something that you can't give them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think referral pathways are really almost part of boundaries. I kind of see them as the same thing. It's like, this is my role and my area of responsibility, and this is yours. And when we can't deal with it because it's not our responsibility, these are the next places that we go. And you have to make sure you speak to that as well with participants.
You mentioned before we started recording that you've kind of flirted with burnout. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because I think that that's an important thing to air and to discuss around this work. We tend to be very focused on the positive, and there's lots to be focused on. There's lots of great things, obviously, about this work for both the participants and leaders like yourself, but we can't ignore, and we can't take a Pollyanna kind of view. We can't ignore the fact that there's so many challenges, and you've just outlined really articulately what some of those key challenges are. Talk to me about your experience with, skating around burnout and how you've kind of dealt with that.
It's a tricky one. And my experience has been that I didn't know I was burnt out. I was so busy just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And when you work for yourself like I do, and our jobs are portfolio careers, so we have fingers in many pies, there's always more work than there are hours in the day. So I didn't know I was burnt out until some months down the track, until someone actually held a mirror up in front of me and said, I think you're burnt out. But I knew that things didn't feel as joyful as they usually do. And I was feeling tired and I couldn't quite put my finger on what was wrong. And then I started, looking at my practice and going, is it just that I've done it for so long that it just doesn't feel exciting anymore? What can I do that's different? And look, I'm still making sense of it. I would dearly love it not to be the case. I feel a little bit like it might be of my own making, but there's a little bit of a stigma for me around burnout. And I feel super, super weak and like somehow I should just be able to pull it together. But ultimately, I think that the kind of work that I do and possibly the way that I do it is very much about giving. You give of yourself a lot, even though there's a boundary and you don't insert yourself into somebody's life. When you care about the work you do and you care about the people that you work with, the kind of work we do is very much about giving. We give of ourselves a lot. And I think the challenge for me was I just didn't realise that that was really the case, and that I needed to make sure that I kept putting things back in my bucket. So, my own creative practice as a singer has been sidelined by all this beautiful, creative, wonderful, giving work that I do. But, being a singer is one of the things that fills my cup and makes sure that I have energy to give to the other areas of my work and life. So I think burnout is something that happens to a lot of people. I know for many years I've identified myself as a choir leader, and at the moment I do less of that work, and surprisingly and sadly, I have no plans for the future or desire, and I'm hoping that it'll come back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people who end up realising that they have burnout have no idea what's happening to them, but they just don't feel right. They feel really tired. They're losing the joy, the passion, all that kind of stuff. I think for people of our age, Melissa, so we'll reveal that we are middle-aged women, and we're dealing with stuff coming at us from all angles. We've got elderly parents, we've got, we might have teenagers or young adults that we're also trying to manage as well.
Yep. Trying
to lock down in your case, a portfolio career where you're juggling so many different things. Is it any wonder that people, I think, quite commonly experience burnout at this kind of middle stage of life? It just feels like everything starts to kind of push in on you from every angle all at once. And so I think whilst we know that this kind of work, leading singing groups like the work that you've done, can be really beneficial for the leader, it's so important to understand that we actually do need to engage in self-care.
Exactly.
And to be aware of what those symptoms are of, starting to lose the passion and the joy, and thinking, well, what am I not giving myself here that I really need? And I really relate to what you're saying about your own music practice. I feel the same, and I feel exactly the same about that you do about group singing at the moment. I feel like I don't have the desire to do it, but I think it'll come back at some point, and you can't force that.
No, that's exactly right. I have been waiting for the desire to lead a group of singers. Outside of, I still do a little bit of that work, but I've probably been waiting for some kind of project to hit me on the head and to feel really excited about doing that thing. And it hasn't come yet. And I just keep hoping, but worrying just a little bit that maybe it won't come back, but really hoping that it will. So I think I'm like you though. I think it will. I think it just takes time. And I think I love the model that psychologists have, that they engage in supervision. They've always got this therapeutic relationship, this place where they can go to discuss their practice, and someone who's looking at them going, hey, are you okay? And I just think that's super important for this kind of work. We need to, even if we don't have an official one, we need to just make sure that we have connection with other people who do the work that we do. And even, it doesn't necessarily have to be the exact same work that we do. Just to be able to check in and have someone hold a mirror up and say, take a look, are you okay?
Yeah.
Is really important.
Yeah. It's so amazing how often other people can see things in us that we just can't see ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When someone said to me, you are really close to burnout, I was stunned. I hadn't worked it out. I knew I felt tired. I knew I wasn't excited. I knew something was off, but I didn't know what it was. And it was kind of shocking.
So what's next for you then in this space?
I stepped away from Upbeat Arts to create some space to heal and get a bit of balance and learn to look after myself better, and have been focused on Sing Sing Sing, which is the dementia choir that I founded. And now that I have a little bit of extra space around that, that's really kind of, it's a slightly different, it's so much the same in so many ways, but it's a slightly different animal. So just kind of enjoying finding the depth of my practice in that space. I'm working with a creativity coach, trying to get excited about singing again and creating a show for myself, which is sort of scary and exciting all at the same time. In this space, I don't know, I'd love to be able to add to the conversation around group singing for mental health and for all kinds of conditions, and find a way to sort of get the attention of governments and people that can help us with the funding, because the issue is it's kind of almost elitist. The people that come to our dementia choir are people who have a spare quid and who can afford to come, and there are so many people who can't access it, and that breaks my heart. I haven't worked out how to solve that problem, but yeah, I think just continuing to develop my practice, read a lot, I don't know, maybe a Churchill Fellowship or something, I don't know. I think I still love this area of work and I will continue to do it. I just have to come at it from a less harried perspective.
Yeah. On the funding thing, I mean, you've worked with state government for a long time. It sounds like you've tried, many different pitches for this kind of work. And in the current kind of, financial crisis, I think, that we find ourselves in, not just in this country, but probably across the world, it feels more challenging than ever to be trying to advocate for something that people don't understand, don't know really what it is.
Yeah.
Even though we're never asking for very much money,
No.
And like you said earlier, this is cheap compared to the way that we're dealing with this currently. And no one's saying that this is like a silver bullet or anything, but it could be part of the response, right? Yeah,
absolutely.
I ask everybody that I talk to, how can we really advocate and clearly communicate how impactful this work is so that we get people with the purse strings on board?
Yeah, I wish I had an answer to that. I think the first thing that comes to mind is local research is more powerful opening local doors. And I know that was certainly the case with Upbeat Arts. We were really fortunate to have Genevieve Dingle from the University of Queensland come on board from day one and research. And so having that that research about that specific intervention to present to Queensland Health is what's opened funding doors at Queensland Health. And you know, Upbeat Arts is the only nationally accredited arts organisation that is, you know, nationally accredited to provide mental health services. And that's happened because of the relationship with Queensland Health. You know, I think research costs money, unfortunately, too, but research at a local level hopefully is better received by our local government authorities. I don't know what the answer is. It seems to me that the powers that be just really are not interested in arts and creativity.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of short-term thinking going on, isn't there? And, you know, I'm reading about QUT undergoing a review of all of their creative and performing arts at the moment.
Yeah.
All of their offerings, you know, and it just speaks to a lack of valuing of what those things contribute to society. But I actually love your suggestion about the local research, because it's really interesting that you say that. I think there's a lot of talk within research circles that we need bigger, more, you know, controlled, randomized control trials of like really large sample sizes and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, in your experience, perhaps the opposite is the case, and that relatable local evidence can be quite persuasive.
Yeah. Look, I think you probably need both. I think both are valuable, but you're right. You know, we are, and there's lots of reasons why larger scale, you know, properly controlled for the kind of work we do is so important. But it's got to have for our local governments and policymakers and movers and shakers to pay attention, they really need to see what's happening on the ground.
Speaking of, you know, training musicians and the situation at QUT and elsewhere, what advice would you give to musicians who might be interested in working in this singing for health and wellbeing space?
Do it. That's the best advice.
And by that, do you mean just kind of throw yourself into it and just start?
No.
Okay.
Although there's lots of things that, you know, I did that and I didn't. I had lots of positive experiences. I would not wait for the opportunity. I'd go and find someone who does the work and create an opportunity to shadow, to follow, to learn, to get involved. I'd go and learn whatever I could and create a relationship with someone who can support you to start your own thing. I think it's probably really good in this instance, in this kind of work, to try before you buy. Go and check it out. Come and sit in one of my choirs, sit in your Parkinson's choir, you know, go and experience it, get involved as a volunteer, and then get yourself some support and opportunity to learn and get going. There's so much need and it's such rewarding and fulfilling work. And then create a network around you of people. It doesn't have to be a big network. Just make sure you have somewhere to go if you've got a question or you're struggling with something. Just make sure you're connected. And I would say too, for, you know, if somebody, from time to time, I've had a number of choir directors come and work with me on upskilling or, you know, settling into a new choir, starting a health and wellbeing-focused choir. And your network can just be one person. As long as you've got someone in your corner and somewhere to go, that's what you need. And so I always try to make sure that we check in on a regular basis and nobody's kind of left to their own devices ever. I think it's important to be connected.
Great advice. What advice would you give to your younger self now, looking back?
That I have an incredible amount to give. And that probably the thing that's made the difference, the biggest amount of difference in my work, is showing up as myself. Probably like a lot of people, I was unsure of myself, filled with self-doubt when I left high school, and we struggle to find our way in the world. And now I know that the most effective thing I can do is show up authentically as myself, just be myself, and be open and compassionate. And I don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to have all the answers. I really didn't know what I was doing when I started this. I had a few bits of information and some skills, but I didn't know how to bring them together. And so maybe the other thing I would say is just play, create, listen to your inner wisdom and follow your instincts, and something beautiful will happen. You'll create something that is uniquely yours and that can benefit others.
Speaking of playing and having fun, what song makes you feel truly alive?
There's a fantastic song that I listen to when I need a minute of inspiration called Stand by Rascal Flatts, who are a country band. And I remember sort of discovering them by accident and then going into a deep, dark rabbit hole, listening to everything that they'd ever done. And I found this amazing song that says, when push comes to shove and you don't think you can do it, just stand up. And it just is so motivating. It's the song that gets me dancing around the house. And this is one of the things I love about being a choir director. You can take songs that you love and make your choirs sing them. And if you're really lucky, your choirs love them as much as you do. So that's one of the favourites from the Upbeat Arts choirs. So, yeah, Stand by Rascal Flatts is just a powerful message of, you can feel rubbish, but just stand up and start again.
Melissa Gill, thank you for making music that matters and for being my guest today on Leading Notes.
Thank you so much for having me, Melissa. It's been lovely.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make sure to leave a review. I acknowledge that this podcast is produced on the lands of the Gayabal and Jarowair peoples of the Toowoomba region, and I pay my respect to all elders. Mark Schultes produced the original music for this podcast. Thanks for listening. Now go make music that matters.